Colour of Magic, a Discworld novel by Terry Pratchett. If I had a penny for every time someone asked me where I got the idea of the Discworld, I'd have... hang on a moment. £4.67. Anyway, the answer is that it was lying around and I didn't look as though it belonged to anyone. The world rides through space on the back of a turtle. It's one of the great ancient myths found wherever men and turtles were gathered together. The 4 elephants were an Indo-European sophistication. The idea has been lying in the lumber rooms of legend for centuries. All I had to do was grab it and run away before the alarms went off. Since this is a reprint by popular demand, of the first book in a series that will eventually contain at least 10, there's a very good chance that you already know what happens after this book, which is more than I did when I wrote it. The Discworld is not a coherent fantasy world. Its geography is fuzzy. It's chronologically unreliable. A small travelling circle of firelight in a chilly infinity has turned out to be the home of defiant jokes and last chances. There are no maps. You can't map a sense of humour. Anyway, what is a fantasy map but a space beyond which there be dragons? On the Discworld, we know there be dragons everywhere. They might not all have scales and forked tongues, but they be here all right, grinning and jostling and trying to sell you souvenirs. Enjoy. Terry Pratchett, October 1989. The Colour of Magic. Prologue. In a distant and second-hand set of dimensions in an astral plane that was never meant to fly, the curling star mists waver and part. See. Great Archuin, the turtle, comes swimming slowly through the interstellar gulf. Hydrogen, frost on his ponderous limbs, his huge and ancient shell pocked with meteor craters. Through sea-sized eyes that are crusted with rheum and asteroid dust, he says fixedly at the destination. In a brain bigger than a city, with geological slowness, he thinks only of the weight. Most of the weight is of course accounted by Briella, Tubal, Great Fnon, and Jacoen, the 4 great giant elephants upon whose broad and star-tanned shoulders the disk of the world rests. Garlanded by the long waterfall at its vast circumference and domed by the baby blue vault of heaven. Astropsychology has as yet been unable to establish what they think about. The Great Turtle was a mere hypothesis until the day of a small and secretive kingdom of Krull, whose rimmost mountains project out over the rimfall, built a gantry and pulley arrangement at the tip of the most precipitous crag and lowered several observers over the edge in a quartz-windowed brass vessel to peer through the mist veils. The early astrozoologists, hauled back from their long dangle by enormous teams of slaves, were able to bring back much information about the shape and nature of Archuin and the elephants, but this did not resolve fundamental questions about the nature and purpose of the universe. For example, what was Archuin's actual sex? This vital question, said the astrozoologist with mounting authority, would not be answered until a larger and more powerful gantry was constructed for deep space vessel. In the meantime, they could only speculate about the revealed cosmos. There was, for example, the theory that Archuin had come from nowhere, and would continue in a uniform crawl, or steady gait, into nowhere, for all time. This theory was popular among academics. An alternative, favoured by those of a religious persuasion, was that Archuin was crawling from birthplace to the time of mating, as were all the stars in the sky, which were, obviously, also carried by giant turtles. When they arrived, they would briefly and passionately mate, for the first and only time, and from that fiery union, new turtles would be born to carry a new pattern of worlds. This was known as the Big Bang Hypothesis. Thus, it was a young cosmocolonian of the Steady Gate faction, testing a new telescope with which he hoped to make measurements of the precise albedo of the great Archuin's right eye, was, on this eventful evening, the first outsider to see the smoke rise hubward from the burning of the oldest city in the world. Later that night, he became so engrossed in his studies he completely forgot about it. Nevertheless, he was the first. There were others.